doesn't tell me we're being recorded, but oh well. Okay, so I should be able to get through both sellers and buyers today. So we're just going to kind of race. And if you guys need me to stop or slow down, just let me know. Sorry, I don't like that monitor. I can't see it. I know that's why you sat over there, so I wasn't looking at you. Buyers and sellers are very similar as far as the actual paperwork. There's just a couple of differences. So let's do the seller first. Get this off the screen. Okay. Again, stop me if something doesn't make sense or if we need to back up or anything like that. Owner's name goes here in the first blank, will represent the owner of the property, and then Keller Williams goes in this blank. Because when your client signs both the buyer's agency agreement as well as the seller's agency agreement, they're actually hiring Keller Williams Greater Springfield. And then the brokers of Keller Williams Greater Springfield will designate agents or agent, whatever the case may be, to work with this particular client. So, and that comes later, and I'll point that out again when we get there. City address, city, zip, county, for a period beginning with the effective date. So the date that your client signs this contract, all the way back here, this date is the effective date, the date that this contract actually begins. Well, look at you. I'm going to do buyer and seller. Hi, Nicole. How are you?
I also have compensation.
Okay. Yeah, I will.
Inspection. Do you want those or no?
I don't know that I need inspection. Okay, so anyway, back to what we were saying. So whenever they sign this contract, becomes the date that this contract effectively begins. This date up here on page 1 is the date that this agreement effectively ends. So if you had a 6-month agreement with this client right now, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. So it would be April 8th would be the date in this blank right here if you had a 6-month agreement. Does that make sense? Okay. Together for a list price for the sales price of X. Now, let's suppose that you've done your due diligence and your CMAs and you have the opinion that this property should be listed for $99,900. And the client is dead set and they said, nope, we've got to make a little more money out of it. We're going to list it at $105,900. Okay, great. So we signed this document today with $105,900 in this blank. And we're going to begin our listing tomorrow. Client calls me first thing in the morning and says, you know what? We thought about it. We slept on it. And we really think that we got to get this house sold. So we're going to go with your number of $99,900. Don't worry about coming back and amending this and having them initial off on it. The only one that matters as far as them signing off on the final number is your data entry sheet for the MLS. Once that goes in, any changes, then we've got to have their signatures to alter it, okay? So if you haven't actually done the data sheet entry or had them sign that yet, then do it at $99,900. But if they've already signed that, then you are going to have to go back and amend. Okay. I'm just saying, don't worry about coming back with this one. If for some reason you do it, and, or even when you do price reductions, you don't need to mess with this number. This is what you agreed to the date that you signed this particular contract. Anything else is an amendment that you've had with your client. In terms of cash or other price, shall consent to the following under special terms, if any. Are we doing a carpet allowance? Is the roof getting replaced? Are we going to leave the pool and all the equipment? Anything along those lines. Solar panel equipment, et cetera, et cetera. Checkbox if legal description is attached. I'm going to tell you both here and in the contract later when we go over it, leave this box unchecked. Because if no legal description is provided, then the legal description on the owner's vesting deed to govern. So what does that mean? That means it takes the responsibility off of your shoulders and sets it over here on top of the title company. And guess what that also does? It takes that liability off your shoulders and sets it on the title company. Your broker really likes it when we lose a lot of liability, put it on somebody else. So I would tell you just leave that unchecked and let them take care of that. Owner acknowledges and everything I'm going to do by the expenditure of time, money, advertising, et cetera, to try to sell your property. Owner also will refer all inquiries and prospects that you may receive during this listing period from any source to me to avoid the possibility of confusion over any agency relationship and misunderstandings about liability for compensation. Mr. Seller, Mr. Buyer, you are hiring me. Let me do my job. If you want to Talk to the neighbor at your garage sale. That's great. If they want to look at the house, call me. Mr. Buyer, if you want to go to an open house, that's great. Let me know so I can call that agent ahead of time. I don't want there to be any confusion from anybody else about who is working for you and who truly is supposed to be paid by you. And that's what we're saying under our breath. That's the message that is important to us. We want to make sure we're getting paid, right? All right. Here's the fun stuff, kids. Broker compensation, cooperation, and shared compensation policy. I think that I've preached this enough. Most people are getting it at this point. If you have the word commission in your brain, throw it out. Compensation is the word. Commission will get you in trouble. Okay. Okay. Retainer fee. This is brand new. We have not had this instrument on a contract until this one came out. Essentially, it's saying, Mr. Seller, you're going to pay me X number of dollars right now. And this retainer fee either will be credited towards what you're going to owe me at the end of the day, or it will not. I'm just going to keep this money even, and if we do sell the house, you're going to pay me more money. And I have the right to take this, either the effective date of this contract within X days of the listing or whatever the other is. So I honestly don't think, unless you've got $1 million house, that this makes a whole lot of sense, because we've got another place for our transaction fee later on in it. I'm not saying don't use it. I'm saying I'm naive enough with this yet. I haven't seen it used enough to know how people are utilizing this. Okay, so there's one example right there. Perfect. I hadn't thought of that yet. So things like that you know you're going to be out money up front, you may want to consider making it a retainer fee instead of the transaction fee that you're going to get at the end of the transaction for your, your admin and those kinds of things. Okay. Compensation. This is pretty straightforward, gang. I'm going to sell your house, and then you're going to pay me a fee in the amount of X dollar amount, a fee in the amount of percentage, or you're going to trade me out in chickens and the car out front, or a combination of, it can be a combination of all those for that matter too. All right. Compensation and shared compensation. Mr. Seller, if you offer me enough up here, I intend to take some of that and offer it to buyer's agents. If I do offer it to buyer's agents, this is the manner in which I will offer it to them. Sub-agents will get this much, buyer's agents will get this much, transaction brokers will get this much. I can't price fix you. I can't tell you what to do. What we've seen in the past is you would probably have this number here, and then you would probably have this number in all of these. I think some of you have been to my classes before, and you know that I'm old and cynical. I can't stand transaction brokers, and I don't pay them as much. If you're a transaction broker, you're making this much of the transaction. So, again, that's pretty straightforward. You're going to allow me to cooperate with other brokers, relationships as identified in the shared compensation rider, which we will receive from the other agent when we get the contract. And I'm going to tell them, if they do want to send us an offer, here's the amounts that we are willing to offer to them. Now, in the event that, let's say your client has had a terrible experience with ABC Realty, and they tell me, Don, I don't care. I really got to sell this house, but we had such a terrible transaction with ABC that we really don't want to entertain any offers from their office, nor do we want them going through our property. They can do that. So you can actually check the box right here and says, we're going to offer compensation with excludes these right here. Or you could exclude transaction broker, or you could exclude whatever. What I will tell you is, don't publish this information. Because if you put it out, even on agent only remarks, we will not pay ABC Realty a compensation, I promise you I will get a phone call, because they will see that as slander. Because they're saying, oh, so we're a bad company, so you're putting it out in writing. So don't publish it, but if your client truly doesn't want those people there, they have the right to say that. Other compensation, this is the transaction fee that most people is what they identify it as. So, you talked about getting pictures up front, but photos, admin, all of those little pieces that aren't really what you worked this job for, but it's still costing you money to do them. You don't have to charge a transaction fee. A lot do. I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, never charged one. So it just kind of depends on, and I think I'm going to start, because I've got to start using those people upstairs. It's so terrible at paperwork. Do as I say, not as I do, kids, I promise you. So if you are getting that, then you would just say, okay, I'm going to get a fee in the amount of X, and it's due and payable when. Most likely, you're just going to put at closing in that blank, because the check's got to be made out to Keller Williams. We don't have an escrow account, so you're just going to have to hold on to the check till you close anyway, because I'm not going to require them to go cutting $250 checks. Now, if it is a retainer fee that we do not have to pay back in the future, and we know that we need that money so we can go pay our photographer, I haven't talked to them about that upstairs, but I think that's fine. I don't think we'll have hundreds of retainer fees a week that we're going to have to worry about. I'm just trying to keep them from having too much extra work because they've changed all our forms. All right, compensation clear as mud. Yeah, okay. All right, protection period. All this all this compensation up here is due to me during the period of this contract. Also, up to however many days you choose to do. I personally do 90. I think a lot of the big teams use 180. I know Rhett sometimes even slips through 365. What it's stating is, if I have a client and my contract expires with them today, and let's say I have a 90-day protection period in there. So I've got October, November, December. So I've got till December 8th is my protection period. If in this time frame, this seller, and this verbiage is exactly the same in the buyer's agency agreement too, so I'm going to do both of them kind of at the same time here. If this seller in the next 90 days sells their house to someone that looked at their house while my agreement was in place, I'm still owed compensation. If my seller goes and hires a new agent tomorrow, my protection period goes away. If my buyer goes and buys a house that I showed them during our employment, I'm still owed compensation from that buyer. If that buyer goes and hires a new agent and I'm out. So the protection period only applies if they don't hire another agent. And it's truly designed to protect us, to keep the seller from having that garage sale, somebody coming up and saying, oh, I've been wanting to live in this house for years. I tell you what, my agreement expires on Friday. Why don't you just wait? And then all of a sudden we're cut out of it. Okay. So I will tell you, don't run out when class is over and open a bank account for all the protection period money you're going to make over the years. I would tell you probably a handful that I could tell you about over the last 2 decades. And mainly the reason that we've had those come through is because the agents on the other side were stand up. They called us and said, hey, by the way, Susie Barnes is buying 123 Main Street. I'm pretty sure you guys showed it to her 3 weeks ago. Okay. So, but it's built there just to keep us from getting backdoored. Then you're done. Yeah. And that's what all this legalese from the attorney says right down here. It says that I am protected provided that the client doesn't hire another agent. All right. Owner seller concessions. This is new with all of the new things that we've done. Owner authorizes realtor to advertise seller concessions. Yes or no? And now we have a MLS blank for it. This to me is very much like the next section we're going to talk about, home warranty. I would encourage you to try to either get yes checked or consider it a later date. Same thing with offer a warranty plan. Either offer a warranty plan or consider it a later date. Because as soon as you go check and no and not offer a warranty plan, you've already built a wall up with that client. Not necessarily with you, but about that in the future. You get an offer and it's got a home warranty. They've already got this mental block because they said, well, we weren't going to offer a home warranty. Well, you did say you would consider it at a later date. Then you've got ammunition. Or, hey, I really think we need to put some seller concessions out there. Can we do that? Yeah, well, that's fine. You don't have to go back and change anything because they said they would consider it a later date. If they already say no, it's going to be a harder battle for you, I promise. Any concessions that are offered from the seller to the buyer. Whatever is not utilized goes back to the seller. So if it's all burnt up, then it's all burnt up. But if they use $24.99 of that, that last dollar goes back to the seller. And we found out yesterday, and I don't want to confuse you guys, but if your seller is offering concessions, I don't necessarily like this methodology because I think it could get in trouble with some of our lending stuff, but we have found out from the board that we can put in agent only remarks, not the public remarks, that the seller is willing to offer up to whatever this amount might equal in seller concessions as closing costs. Because now there is verbiage in there that we can have, they can utilize closing costs as part of paying compensation. I'm getting concessions, compensation. I'm getting all the words mixed up, but you can put in there that the seller's willing to offer $2,500 in concessions for compensation. And if and when you get pushback on that, call me, because I had Stacy keep all the paperwork from everybody that she's talked to yesterday to make sure if we have issues, this was the permission that we were given. Okay. So seller concessions and warranty. Again, home warranty, gang, to me is the easiest sell there is. Your house is going to show better, probably sell quicker. Buyer's going to feel more comfortable. And if it truly comes down to being a deal breaker over $600, I promise you I can get that figured out. Between myself, the lender, somebody will get this figured out if that is truly a deal breaker at the end of the day. But I promise you your property will show better. With the exception of foreclosures, I never list a house that doesn't have a home warranty on. All right, disclosures and authorizations. Does the seller care if we tell people why they're selling their house? If you check does, you must put something in this blank. If you check does not, you can just tell everybody to mind their own business and you can leave this alone. All right, 9091, two pretty big ones for me. Offers and terms. Hopefully you can get both of these checked does. Line 90 says, does permit the realtor to disclose the existence of offers on the property. That way, if I get a call that says, hey, I'm going to send you an offer at 5 o'clock tonight, I can say, great, just so you know, I've already got 2 on the table. Simple as that. The paragraph at 91 says I can discuss terms of those offers. So you could call me and say, hey, I'm going to send you a $100,000 conventional, close in 45 days with $2,500 closing costs, should have it there by 4 o'clock this afternoon. Great, just so you know, I've already got $100,000 cash on the table. Or I've already got $100,000 conventional with no closing costs. You don't have to disclose everything you know about the offer, but it gives you the ability to perhaps head off at the pass and offer that your client's not going to consider anyway. And if you get into a situation where there's, competition on your property, this comes in really handy, because then you're not constantly picking the phone up and having to get permission from your seller to do everything. All right, love letters. I do not like love letters. You can like them if you want to. To me, this transaction is emotional enough for my seller to begin with. All the love letter does is bring in someone else's emotions into my transaction. That's how I feel about it. And that's how I explain it to my seller. You'll have some that, I just really want a family to move in this house. We've raised our kids here. Great. If you want to see them, that's fine. I just feel like it's going to be detrimental to our process. Because if you fall in love with these people and then we get a 10-page inspection notice, are you going to feel obligated to fix everything for them because you fell in love with their love letter? I don't want to spend more money if we don't have to, just because you like the people. Just saying. This is somewhat of a business transaction. So anyway, I just think they muddy the waters. If you're, all right, somebody was in the waiting room. So anyway, if your client really wants to see him, that is completely their right. I would encourage you to encourage them not to do that. All right, current representation agreement. 99.9 times out of 100, your client will not be working with someone else, because through your efforts, you've either gone out and found this buyer or this seller, right? But let's suppose that this seller called you and said, hey, Don's not doing a very good job. His agreement with us expires on the 15th of this month. Would you be willing to take over our listing at that point? Blank's not big enough. Interesting. didn't even notice that yet. So if they say, yeah, I'm not happy, will you take over our agreement whenever his expires? You can say yes, and you can go over and have a conversation with this client today. You cannot advise them, you cannot consult them, you cannot badmouth me, but you can go get this agreement signed so you are in place and in position when mine expires. Now, I told you earlier that once the client signs here, this becomes the effective date that this agreement begins. Well, that can't happen because they're already under an agreement with me. You can still have this signed today and date it here, and then you're going to come right back up here to effective date. And your effective date is going to be 10/16. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Another thing while we're on effective date, just to go ahead and muddy the water a little bit more for you. I don't necessarily agree with it, but the board rule is from 4 days after whatever your effective date is, whether it's here or here, your listing has to be live in the MLS. The minute that you put a sign in the yard or advertise it outside these 4 walls, you've got 24 hours. And if they choose to audit your file and see that, your effective date, you were advertising, et cetera, you'll get dinged and you'll get a fine for it. I personally think we should be able to put all of our clients under seller's agreements right now, and just whenever they're ready to sell, I've already got them under. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. You could come up here to special agreements and put this agreement to take effect whenever client it goes under contract to purchase a property, and just have him and you initial right here. Okay. Perfect. I don't know that you need to redo it. You need to just make sure that everybody's on the same page. And I think you can do what you want or wanting to do in this special agreement section. It's not going to hurt to go back and redo it, but because either way, they're either going to have to initial here or they're going to have to re-sign the document. You can just do it right here. Just come in and put whatever your terms are in the special agreements, and then have everybody initial right here, because that'll be an addition to this or an alteration to this contract. Then you don't have to get a whole brand new one. All right, so effective date. So again, whatever that may be, if your client, let's suppose, is getting the roof replaced and they don't want to list it until that's done, move your date out a little bit. You still have them as a client, just move their effective date out. So if your file does get audited, you're not getting dinged. All right. Is or is not working with someone else. All right. Is not. But again, if they are, then you'll put your date here. All right. General conditions, property disclosure statement. If you have a property listed as an agent with Keller Williams, you must have a seller's disclosure statement. So it will always be checked does. If your client says they don't wish to, you tell them, well, it's a requirement for our E&O insurance, which it is. You have to have a home warranty, either application or waiver, and we must have seller's disclosures on the property for your E&O to be applicable. So also, owner's going to authorize for me and my prospects, inspectors, appraisers, lenders, and so forth to come through the property and obtain information. And you're going to give me this information as true and accurate as you know, and you're going to let me know in writing fully and promptly if any discovery is made between now and settlement, which may cause an adverse material fact that we need to disclose to the other party. You also further agree to promptly furnish me with all inspection reports regarding the property and authorize me to disclose and provide such reports to prospects. So I've got the house under contract. Buyer number 1 does their inspection. Deal falls through because we can't come to terms on inspection. Number 1, going to encourage and tell my seller you need to update your disclosures. And there's actually a seller's disclosure addendum that we will just allow you to attach those documents. 2, next offer I get, I'm going to tell them, hey, by the way, I'm going to wait till I go under contract. I'm probably not going to send it immediately out. And that's the reason I don't necessarily like the seller's disclosure addendum, because then it's just showing the entire report versus just updating the disclosures with the information that you know. But if I got a property that does go under contract again with buyer two, I'm going to call the agent and say, hey, I've got the inspection report. I'm going to send it over to you. Because keep in mind, anything that you have knowledge of, you must disclose. So guess what's the easiest way to disclose that knowledge about that inspection report? Give me the report. Okay. Notice of intended sale. We're going to make sure that the seller has all of their receipts and so forth to the lender to make sure all payments are made so we don't saddle the buyer with a lien on the property. Lead-based paint report. Either it is, yes, exempt, 78 or after, or no, yeah, or it's 78 or before, and we've got to disclose it, and we're going to attach the lead-based paint. They changed some of that verbiage, but it's still exempt up here, not exempt down here. Representations. In addition to the seller's disclosure statement that the owner did up here, they don't know of any other subdivision or HOAs. They don't know of any other adverse material facts. And to the best of their knowledge, everything's going to be working as of the time of closing. So if you know that the oven's broken and it's not going to be working, put it in special agreements just to make a note of it, and put it in agent only remarks and put everybody on notice up front. Hey, stove's broken and we're not going to fix it. Okay. Representation is not construed to be a warranty. Also make sure that your seller, I think this is going to start happening a little bit more, but you may start seeing over the next 18 months or so where people might actually be upside down in their house because, sorry to say it, people are still spending more money than they got. So at some point, something's got to give. And so we need to make sure that whatever we're actually going to sell this house for is going to get them out of the debt that they need to get out of. It hasn't really been an issue for the past 3 or 4 years because our appreciation rate has gone up so much that someone can still be buried in it and get out of it and not be upside down. Owner represents that they are or not a foreign person, which is a citizen or a resident alien. When in doubt, there's a wonderful little website right here, but they're going to have to be one of those two things because otherwise they're not going to have the paperwork to transfer the property. Same thing on the buyer's side. The same paragraphs on the buyer's document. They have to be one of those two or have the right paperwork because otherwise they won't have the right paperwork to take possession of the property. Indemnity, you're going to hold me harmless, Mr. Seller, and anybody else for any damages, actions, claims, demands, suits, lawsuits, expenses arising out of misrepresentation, non-disclosure, or concealment about anything that could have been omitted by you, Mr. Seller. So if you don't tell me something and I don't know it and litigation pops up because of that, I can't be drug into that. As soon as you tell me, guess what? Then I've got to disclose it. But owner personally presume any and all claims made by buyer, tenant, or other third party with respects to errors and omissions. So the seller saying, I'll take out that responsibility if I didn't tell you something. Title and survey, we're going to furnish them with a clear title as of the time of closing. Taxes and assessments will be prorated as of the date of closing. So if I close on June 30th, seller pays half the year, buyer pays the other half. All right, earnest money and liquidated damages. This is the second bank account I do not want you to go open today. But what this says is if there's earnest money, so let's suppose we had that $1 million house with the $10,000 earnest money and the deal went south. First thing that happens is the seller recoups any real expenses that they've had. So title fees, survey fees, anything that they have spent money on, they're entitled to recoup their fees. Then it says any real fees that we have had. So if for whatever reason we paid to have the septic uncovered or we've spent money on photography or whatever that is, we're entitled to receive our payment. And then it says if there's anything left, we'll split it 50-50. You're never going to see earnest money gain. So I wouldn't even, this paragraph's always fascinated me because I've never seen anyone get any part of earnest money ever. So, but it's built in there. So if you choose that we need to fight something, we have the instrument in order to get it done. MLS and lockboxes. We're going to file part or all this information on our MLS, and it's going to be shared with all of our members, unless in writing you tell me you don't want it there. I'm going to cooperate and offer compensation to other brokers, as we discussed on page 2 of this contract. And I'm also going to place a lockbox on your property, and you're going to hold me harmless and indemnify me with all the participants of the lockbox users, so forth, provided I did not was not grossly negligent with the act of my lockbox. And there's some other legalese in there. So best practice is attach the lockbox to the door. Some clients won't want it on the door because they don't want it scraping the paint. Board of Realtors sells these little foam things that you can put behind the lockbox. Sometimes that's still not acceptable. Fine. If you can attach it anywhere, that is the best. If you can't attach it, and it has to be just sitting on the front porch, put it behind a flower pot. If they don't have a flower pot, go buy them a flower. Because all that little blue box does sitting on the front porch is just go, hey, come look at me. And from experience, even though they stole the doorknob to get mine, so I didn't just have it haphazard. If you have a vacant house and the lockbox gets taken and somebody does cut into it and then breaks in the house and steals all the copper, your seller's really pissed. Okay? So the reason I say that about the flower pot is every time your lockbox is popped, you get a ding on your phone. It says, hey, super user, somebody's opened your lockbox. Then I can call my seller and say, hey, I saw we had a showing today at 2:30. I'm about to call the agent back. Will you do me a favor and make sure that that lockbox is back behind the flower pot? Because then we've shown our effort to make sure that it's not just out there waving at everybody driving up and down the road. Okay? Advertising, you're going to permit me to put a for sale sign in your front yard and put it on the internet and all these places. Again, unless in writing, you tell me you do not want me to do that. Inspections and access, you're going to allow me and my cooperating brokers to come into the property, along with lenders and so forth, and allow third parties that also may be taking photographs or videotapes of the interior and exterior of your property upon reasonable notice and at times. So, Mr. Seller, you should remove any items of a personal nature that you do not want to be photographed, recorded, or transmitted. If you don't want it seen, put it away. Clearly, we're going to go in and try to help these folks stage the house anyway. But if they don't want it seen in pictures on the internet, kids of their pictures, kids on the wall, pictures on the wall, whatever, take it down. Even if they put it right back up after you take your pictures, just keep in mind that anything you put out there, it's everyone's going to see it. And then it says we're going to have the utilities on. I don't know why it's in the middle of this paragraph. I don't like where it's put, but then I'm going to have the utilities on during any inspection and walk through the property. And then it also says owner agrees to remove or secure and insure property and valuables, but not limited to firearms, money, and assume the risk of vandalism, theft, or damage of any kind, and to maintain the property in a good repair condition. So to me, this paragraph is very much, we're going to have people in and out of your house. If you don't want it seen, put it away. If you don't want it taken, put it away. And try to pay attention when you're walking through the house with your client, because, you know, you might see that they've got that basket on the kitchen counter that clearly is the catch-all when people come into the house. That's where the keys are. That's where there's a bunch of change. There's a $20 bill. Hey, that's fine. If you guys want to keep doing this, can we at least put it in the drawer? Not make it quite so obvious. Okay, just be mindful of those things. Is that grandma on the mantle? We might want to put her somewhere else because I don't want some kid to get loose and accidentally knock her down. Be mindful of those things for your clients, okay? More and more prevalence of cameras in the houses, doorbells with cameras. Mr. Seller, do me a huge favor. Don't listen to anyone that's looking at the house. And if you do, don't tell me. Because if you get in trouble and there's a lawsuit, I don't want to be part of it. But let me explain this to you, Mr. Seller. If we have a client come through and you're eavesdropping on them and you hear the wife say, oh, this kitchen's just great, but I hate those corn curtains. And those are the ones your grandma made for you that you've loved since you were a little girl. You're already mad at that buyer. And this could have been the easiest transaction that we would have ever had, but you're already adversarial because they don't like the curtains in your kitchen. And Mr. Seller, we're also going to go look at properties as a buyer. Do you want people listening to us? It's a quick lesson there too. Make sure you're educating your buyers when you're going into properties. Let's not have any real important conversations here or on the front porch, because those cameras are listening and watching. And also my black hat of the day. You know, if you've got one of those little boxes over on the counter that you yell at and tell them to play music or whatever, there's a website you can go to and print out every single word that you've said since you plugged that in. So anyway, just tell them if you got a camera, don't listen. Legal and professional advice. I am a realtor by trade. I am not a law, tax, finance, survey, structural, mechanical hazmat, or any other specialized topic. If we encounter a situation during this sale, or same thing to the buyer during this purchase, where you need any of those kinds of people, I'm going to encourage you to go talk to those people. If you don't have them, I'm more than happy to help you find them. But I'm not about to answer those types of questions because it's not in my purview. Okay. Default and remedy, Mr. Seller, we're going to get along great. Mr. Buyer as well. Same thing in the buyer contract. We're going to get along great. But in the event that I've got you a contract in place with a ready, willing, and able buyer, or on the buyer seller side with a ready, willing, and able seller, and you flake on me and I have to pursue you for my compensation, you're also going to pay for my attorney fees, just so you know. Franchise disclosure. We are a franchise, so you'll check this box. In the event that the client gets mad and chooses to sue, they can only sue this office. They can't sue the entire in Keller Williams. Equal opportunity, Mr. Seller, we're going to let everyone through your property without regards to race, color, religion, sex, disabled, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Got through in one breath that time. Also, Mr. Seller, we have talked about love letters earlier. You said you wanted to see them. Keep in mind that we cannot exclude anyone because of any of these protected classes if that is indicated in their love letter, which again, love letter, muddying the waters again. And if you choose to not have any of those particular individuals through the property, I'm sorry, I cannot represent you. And legally, no other realtor in the state of Missouri or in the country can represent you either. And same thing on the buyer side. Mr. Buyer, we're going to go look at all these properties regardless of all these things. If you don't want to do that, find someone else. And oh yeah, you can't find someone else. All right, brokerage relationships. When your client enters into this agreement with you, when you're working for the seller, you are working for the seller and the seller only with the seller's best interest at heart. Same thing when you enter the buyer's agency agreement, you were entering in that with the buyer's best interest at heart. Now, here's the designated agency portion of this. I indicated that whenever your client signs this contract, they are hiring Keller Williams Greater Springfield. And then we will designate you to be the agent or agents to work with that particular client. So if you're a solo agent, pretty self-explanatory. Your name goes here. If you're working in tandem with another agent, both your names. If you're on a team, every licensed member of that team needs to be on here. So like the Holtz and the Grady's, they just have C attached Exhibit A, and they have a printout of all of their licensed agents. Nope. Do you have a licensed transaction coordinator? Is she answering questions to clients? Then don't worry about it. Yeah, the minute that anyone is dealing with the public, that's when we have to have that. If they're behind the scenes, it's fine. All right, so I've entered into this contract again with the seller's best interest at heart or the buyer's best interest at heart. Mr. Seller, in the event through my prospecting, I happen to find the perfect buyer for your house, I would like the opportunity to represent both sides of the table. Now, so hopefully we can get yes check both here. And then I usually go the extra step, especially if I got somebody who doesn't really understand it. And I'll bring them back to this page here that gives just kind of the nuts and bolts. I can't tell that the buyer's willing to pay more, the seller's willing to take less, what the motivating factors are of either party, that the client might agree to different financing terms, and Mr. Buyer, I can't tell you any other offers that we might have previously had on the property. And I go one step further with them and say, imagine that we're sitting in this room and there's just a giant brick wall right down the middle. And there's a door between this side and that side. You're on this side, Mr. Buyer, you're on this side, Mr. Seller. I can't divulge any information through that door from one side to the other without your permission, or without it being in writing, or without it being necessary for the transaction. Clearly, I'm going to be delivering information, but I can't divulge information, if that makes sense. And I even tell them, and this is not a requirement, but I tell all of my clients, I'm like, and if I do enter into a dual agency situation, and should it ever become an issue, I will refer whoever came in second position out to someone else in my office, because you were here first. I've never had anyone tell me no. All right, conversion to transaction brokerage. As I said, I am not a fan. So I'm just going to tell you to check no on both those. Transaction brokerage, you can't advise, consult, give your opinion, give any direction. You are a glorified paper pusher. You can tell them what is supposed to go in blank at line 83, but you can't tell them what that number should be. You can just fill it in for them and tell them what the intent of that line is. So number one, I think it's very difficult to do that because we all got in the business to advise, consult, direct, and help our people and make sure everybody feels warm and fuzzy. So if I enter into this contract with all of those intentions at heart and already in play, I see it nearly impossible. Now I've got to slide back and just be a paper pusher. So I'm just going to tell you to do no. If you have a situation where somebody calls you and said, hey, I was having a garage sale on Saturday. I've been thinking about selling my house. I happen to tell my neighbor, his kid's trying to move down here. I think we've got a deal going. Would you mind to write it up for me? You really haven't done anything. Technically, at this point, you are a transaction broker, but I'm going to encourage you to sign an authorization to show, which allows you to advise, consult, direct, and do all those things. Okay. All right, minimum brokerage services. This is what the statute says that we're going to do. Clearly, we're going to do a whole lot more, but it says we're going to accept, deliver, and present offers to the client. We're going to assist the client in developing, communicating, and negotiating those offers. And we're going to answer questions about those offers, counter offers, and contingencies. Well, duh. Of course, that's what we're going to do. Do you have any personal interest in this property? Are you a party to the transaction? Do you have direct ownership, or are you representing an immediate family member? That is parents, siblings, and children. If you're married, it's on both sides. I personally disclose aunts, uncles, cousins, because I don't see any reason not to. Like I disclosed my college roommate one time, because I never want something stupid like that to be an issue 3 days before closing. I'd rather tell you up front. Okay. Special agreements. Do we need a carpet? Are we offering a carpet allowance? If we didn't put that on page 1. I also will, and this is the same for both the buyer and the seller. I never like to use my client's words against me, but anything that my client's going to do that's going to prevent me from doing the best job I can, I make a note of it. Well, got this new job and, I'm sleeping during the day now, so we could probably show the house Tuesday and Thursday night between 6 and 8. Okay, I'll make a note of that right here. So that way when the client calls me in 2 weeks and says, hey, how come we haven't had any showings? I've had 8 hours to show your house. Can we, and of course I'm going to revisit that night because that's tying my hands too much. That's an extreme example, but anything like that that's going to preclude it. And like on the buyer's side, because that's in there, the same conversations on the buyer's side. We only want a house with a cul-de-sac and a walkout basement. And that way, when they call me, why didn't you show us 123 Main Street? Because it's on 123 Main Street, not 123 Main cul-de-sac. If that's no longer an issue for you, let's revisit that and have a conversation. Signatures. Thanks to one of my favorite things over the last decade, the Missouri Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. You and your client can literally be anywhere in the world and sign this document, and it's valid. Only valid in the state of Missouri, but it doesn't matter where you guys are when you sign it. Okay, this box I'm still arguing with. It doesn't really apply to us because what it says is that you can send me an email to these addresses below and make changes to the MLS. However, compliance is still requiring that we have the data sheet addendum to make those changes. So I think I would encourage you to still check this box, because if I received an email from the client from this email to this email at 8 o'clock this morning that said, hey, let's reduce that list price to $99.9, I could pull my car over, get on, reduce the list price, and then I can do the paperwork later in the day. Because technically they said, I'm going to give you permission via email. But compliance isn't agreeing that that's an acceptable form yet. So, all right, if you got additional signatures, check the box. Keller Williams goes here, your signature, your name, your email. I don't care about your title and the date. Owner, printed name, date, email address. I do try to capture phone numbers. If their address is different, just because I've done this for so long, I try to capture it here. Same thing, and I'll show you on the buyer's agency agreement, there's a place to capture theirs. Like I said, I know we've got commands for all that now, but I still always know I can go to my agreements and see what the address is that I'm looking for. And then if you've got a trust or anything down here, you would just put, what's the name, the title of that. Actually, this one, yeah. No, this is if you have a, let's suppose you had a licensed TC that might be doing this information here. So that way you could have them receive an email and make those changes here. I lose you there. You're looking. But again, you're still going to have the document signed. So I think that electronic at 325, I think it's kind of a moot point for us. And then the last 2 pages of both the buyer and the seller are just the seller's responsibility, the dual agent, and then the transaction brokerage. And I promise you the buyer one will go so much faster just because it is so similar to what we just did. All right, so we're gonna move on to buyer. Any questions about the seller real quick? Because again, I think that this one will reinforce exactly what we just went over. Buyer's name goes here. Keller Williams goes here. What kind of property they looking for, commercial, residential, vacant land, or other. Same thing here. Your effective date when this is signed is when it begins, and this is the date that this agreement expires, or when the buyer closes on a property. And this is new to this year, or this contract actually. Number 2 is new. So if you have an investor that you're planning to work with for the next foreseeable future, you're probably going to want to come back here in the special agreement section and indicate that this agreement carries through until X date, regardless of property's closing. Because otherwise you technically, because of this new addition here with number 2, technically this agreement goes away whenever they close on their property. So technically you would have to have a new buyer's agency agreement for every single time you worked with that investor. And to me, that is, I know investors well enough to know they don't like doing paperwork they don't have to do. So make it easy on yourself and just say this to carry through until December 31st, regardless of any properties closing underneath this agreement. Okay. We're going to do everything we can to acquire and help you find the property, and you're going to refer all inquiries and prospects to me to avoid the possibility of communication and misunderstanding about compensation. You hired me, let me do my job. Motivating factors, same thing. If you've got does checked, must have something in the box. Either they are or are not under an agreement right now. So if my client calls you and says, hey, Don's doing a terrible job, will you take over for us? Sure. Don't call my client because that's jumping my sign. All right, Mr. Buyer, I am going to receive some compensation for this transaction. This one also has the flat retainer fee, which to me is a little bit more, the photos make sense to me on the seller side. Buyer side, you know, if you're worried about the buyer just running you all over town for the next 6 months and not actually doing anything, you may want to consider this. And you can say, yeah, it'll apply to whatever I'm going to be due later, but I want to make sure that you've got some skin in the game going into this. Compensation or shared compensation. So I'm going to hopefully get compensation from another party. But if not, I'm going to be due whatever this amount may be. And it says right here that you understand I'm going to endeavor to collect part of all this compensation due under this agency agreement from the seller or listing broker. And I will attach the shared compensation rider in doing so. And any compensation that I get from that other side will be credited to you at closing. If I'm unable to collect part or all this from a listing broker, buyer will remain obligated to pay me any compensation provided herein. It's a hard conversation to have, but that's one that I want you guys having with your buyers. In the event we happen to find a property where the seller's not offering compensation or not offering the compensation that you and I have agreed to, you will have to have some money out of your pocket. Okay. Other compensation, this is your transaction fee. So if you are charging that 150 or 250 bucks for your admins or for whatever, that's where this amount would go. Protection period, exactly the same as it was in the seller's document. If they hire somebody else, my protection period goes away. If they don't, then I've just got to be diligent about keeping my eye on that person to find out that they're not buying property or selling property without me. I could show my client a property today. My agreement expires. They hire you tomorrow. I'm out. I don't like it. I'm going to be mad about it, but there's nothing I can do about it. Contractually, it says that client only owes me money if they try to backdoor me and do it without an agent. If they hire an agent, I'm out. That is correct. There is no termination clause in either document. There used to be a 30-day out in both of them, but there's no longer a termination clause in either. What I'm going to tell you with the years that I've done all this, that if you have a client that starts to turn south on you, or that did turn south on you, or that is just not happy with you, let them go. It's not worth it to you. It's not worth it to them. I promise you, chasing $5,000 is not worth the mental that you'll go through with that. And I'll also tell you, a lot of you guys are new. There is nothing more freeing than firing a client because they don't think you'll do it. They think they've got you by the tail. They don't. Keep that in mind. You guys are, this is your job. This is your career, your job. Don't let them push you around. Non-performance, same thing. If I've got to come after you because you don't perform, and then you're going to pay my compensation. If I've got to come after you, you're going to pay my attorney fees and right to the retainer fee, or yeah. And if it doesn't close, it does not remove my right to retain that retainer fee or any other compensation that I'm due. When we enter into this contract, we are a buyer's limited agent with the buyer's best interest at heart. Keller Williams is going to designate you to be the agent or agents to work here. Again, conversion to dual agency. Hopefully you can get yes on both those with the same explanation we just went through on the seller side. Transaction brokerage is exactly the same as it was in the seller contract. I like this section right here. I do like to go over this with my clients. 1 and 4 are very similar. You're going to work exclusively with me. You're not going to communicate directly or indirectly with any seller or anyone else talking about selling the property. You're going to consult with me before visiting any new existing homes. And I don't know why it's got or contacting any other broker, because they shouldn't be doing that, to avoid the possibility of confusion over agency relationship and misunderstandings about compensation. You hired me, work with me, tell me everything that's going on. Let me do my job. Number 2, you're going to supply information. The seller is going to want to know how we're purchasing this property. If it's cash, that's great. We're going to still have to show them proof of funds. If it's not, we're going to have to show them a letter from a lender. Guess what? That lender is going to need information from you. Those things need to be provided in a timely fashion to make sure we're getting everything done on time. And then 146, my favorite line that's ever been in a real estate contract. You're going to be available during my regular working hours. Whatever the heck that is. So I just use this as an opportunity to have the conversation of, what are your expectations, Mr. Buyer? About, I'm going to send you MLS properties. I'm going to call you when new ones pop up. What is your expectation of my communication? Is that every other day? Is that every third day? Is that only when I know something? How often do you expect me to reach out to you? Because if that client expects an update every other day and you miss and go to the third day the first time, they're already mad at you. Never agree to every day unless it's a really hot market and you know you're going to have stuff popping up every day. Because if you agree to every day with every client, you'll be pulling your hair out. And Mr. Buyer, how do you want me to make that communication to you? Text, call, email, smoke signals? How do you want me to communicate with you? What's the best way for us to do that? So just have that conversation going into it to try to avoid any potential downfalls without you even trying in the future. Equal opportunity, same thing. We're going to show this to everyone. Notice of a tenant sale. We'll make sure the seller's got all of their receipts there. I am a realtor. If we need any of these people, I'll help you find them. Again, if you default and I've got to come after you, you're going to pay my attorney fees. This is where I'm going to put, oh, you only want houses in a cul-de-sac. Oh, you only can have a fenced in yard. You know, and a lot of those objections you can get across. Well, what if we get you the perfect house and get a fencing allowance? Then you don't have that objection anymore. And you can look at more things. Oh, and this is, Mr. Buyer, you understand that there's still germs in the world and we can't screen every house we go to. And if you get sick, you can't blame me for that. Minimum brokerage services, same as it was in the sellers. Signatures, same thing again. Missouri uniform, you can be anywhere. This one also says that I can make changes via email. Again, we're going to have signed document anyway. All right, recordings on property. Buyer understands property is being shown when available pursuant under surveillance. Buyer hereby releases. So essentially, they're holding us harmless for anything that they say that may get them in trouble. They understand there may be recordings on the property, and we're going to comply with all laws. And if we violate any of those laws, then you're going to have to take care of that, Mr. Buyer. Franchise disclosures? Yes, we are. So check the box. Effective date on the buyer's contract. Clearly, if they're working with me and you're going to take over later, it would make sense for this to be used. If a buyer says, well, we really don't want to look till after Thanksgiving. Great. Let's go ahead and sign this today. I don't want to put our effective date out after Thanksgiving because I would feel really terrible if I found the perfect house for you the Tuesday before Thanksgiving and technically wasn't working for you. I would like to be able to work behind the scenes for you in case that perfect thing comes up between now and then. Oh, okay, that's fine. You don't have to send us houses. I won't send you a thing, but if the perfect house comes up, I want to be sure I can tell you about it. Additional signatures, KW goes here, your name, your signature, your name, email, super realtor, and date. Same thing with your clients over here. Oh, they don't. What goes in on what, 230? Your signature. Signature, and then your printed name here. And then clearly, again, buyer's address and phone numbers and stuff are down here too. And the last 2 pages, again, exactly the same as the last 2 pages on the seller. Okay, so we good on agency. All right, let's go buy a house. I don't know if did she give you the residential contract? I don't think she did. Yeah, I'll do that. We can go ahead and do that one now. It's fine, since you've got it in front of you. All right, so compensation rider. This is what we use because obviously no one's publishing anymore what they may or may not be offering. It's not set in law and is negotiable for the cooperating brokers prohibited from accepting amount of compensation that is greater than what the buyer has agreed to pay under brokerage agreement. So if in that buyer's agency agreement that we just went through, and clearly I can't tell you what you guys can and can't charge, but let's suppose in that agency agreement, you agreed to a 3% compensation from that buyer on this transaction. And you call me and say, hey, I want to show 123 Main Street. Are you offering any compensation? I'm going to say, yep, my seller's willing to offer 4% or buyer's agency compensation on that property. You can only get 3 unless you go back and amend that buyer's agency agreement, because it specifically states in here, you're not entitled to more than you've agreed to with your buyer. Okay. So this rider's attached to whatever property we're making an offer on, goes right here. And then you've got 2 choices here. Technically, you've got 3 choices, I guess. Listing broker compensation to cooperating broker. So if you call me and I say, yeah, we're offering a 3% compensation to any accepted contract from a buyer, then you would say, okay, I already know that the listing broker is doing that. So I'm going to check this box and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put in the number that Don told me. All right. Example number 2 is you haven't called me. You go show the house and you're just going to make the offer. So you're just going to go ahead and send it in with the compensation, but you're still going to ask for it, but you don't know if I'm offering anything as the listing agent. So you're going to come over here and you're going to say, Mr. Seller, I want you to pay me whatever my amount is here. Okay. Even if the seller's already agreed with me as their listing agent, you don't know that. So you're asking the seller, well, the seller's already agreed with me. Ultimately, I will be paying you. But since you don't know if I'm offering it, we're going to ask from the seller. Okay. Example 3, you call me and I say, yeah, my seller's offering a 2% compensation on that property. You have a 3% compensation agreement with your client. So you're going to come in here and you're going to check this and you're going to put down the number that I told you that we were willing to offer. And then you're going to come down here and you're also going to check this box and you're going to say, Mr. Seller, I also want an additional that amount to break even on what I owe my buyer. They don't have to agree to it. It's clearly negotiable, as is everything. But that's how you would turn around and ask for more than I told you that they were offering. Okay. Is that fairly clear? If you know, it goes in 1. If you don't know, it goes in 2. And if you know and it's not enough, it goes in both. Responsibilities of brokers. Separate. We're supposed to have separate brokerage agreements between both of our clients. Also on that buyer's agency agreement, I want to flat back to that real quick. Make sure you're getting those signed before you cross the threshold with the client. And that's an easy conversation to have right now. Is it is against the law for me not to have this signed before I start actively engaging in real estate activities with you. Because the other thing I'm going to tell you, it hasn't happened yet, but I would almost promise you that it will, because now we get the dings that sometimes the MLS will audit your entire file on your listing. Get ready for them to automatically audit your entire file on your buyer side, and they're going to check the date on that agreement, because then they're going to cross-reference it with the date that your lockbox popped on 123 Main Street, and they're going to know if you had an agency agreement in place before you wrote that contract. And then you'll start seeing fines. So be mindful of that. And we're not party to the contract between buyer and seller. This is truly just an agreement between the brokerages, not between, we're not entering into the contract between buyer and seller. They're just agreeing this is how we're going to pay the compensation. So it's just an extra step in the rung in the ladder now, but it's just part of the process. Since we don't know, we can't just say as per MLS because it's not being published in the MLS anymore. So this is what you want to use to make sure you get paid, and just make this part of your packet. This needs to go with every one of your offers, unless for some reason you're not asking for any compensation, which if you're working for free, shame on you. Okay. Let's bounce back and do, I think I can get you through the contract pretty quickly. All right, residential sales contract. Like I said, I don't think you guys have this, so if I need a backup or something, I'll let me know. All right, so the buyer's going to go here. Now you'll notice there's no seller name on this. There doesn't have to be a seller name, because this buyer is making an offer to purchase the property located at this address. The only persons, or entity that can sell the property at this particular address is the one that owns it. So it doesn't matter what the seller name is. It's just, I'm making an offer to purchase this property. If the property is within the city limits, then you need to put that city in this blank. If it's not, then you can leave it alone. So if it's out in the country, you don't need anything in that blank. But if it's in, Springfield proper, Nixa proper, whatever, you need to put the city right there. This is the same thing as it was on the seller listing document. If you check this box, then you're attaching the legal description. If you don't, we take that liability off you and we set it right over here on top of the nice little title company, which is where I'd like it to be. All right, purchase price, earnest money, and seller concessions. Purchase price, obviously, what are we offering to buy this property for? Seller concessions. Well, Mr. Realtor, I don't know what seller concessions are. Well, Mr. Seller, let me bring you back here to section 10 and I'll just show you right now. So, Mr. Seller, these are all of the things that the buyer is going to be responsible to pay during their closing. Everything from $289 to $299 is everything that the buyer is going to be responsible for. And then everything from $300 down here to $305 is everything that the seller is going to be responsible for. And then these parts right here from $308 to $311 is everything that we're going to split based on a pro rata basis. So if the buyer is asking for closing costs on page 1, so we asked for $2,500. That $2,500 comes up here and starts chewing away at this right here. And if it gets all of that chewed away and there's money left over, it skips this because that's always the seller. Then it comes down here and it chews away at all this. And then if there's money left over after that, it goes back to the seller. And you were asking earlier, let me find exactly where it is here. It's the very last one, so it's easy for me to find. So they've added this in here that closing costs can go to all of these things, including any commission or other compensation due from buyer to the brokers. So the example then would be, we get closing costs in the amount of $10,000, which is, I think this is, we're going to run into lender problems, and essentially they're not paying any compensation, but we're having $10,000 in closing costs, and then we're sucking our part of the broker fees out of that $10,000, which is now part of the process that we can do. Again, that concerns me, making an offer like that. If you're going to make an offer like that, talk to your lender first to make sure that that's okay. All right. All right. Sometimes I skip ahead instead of going back. We're on page 1. Okay. So seller concessions. And what I'll tell you, They're becoming more prevalent because we've got some more properties on the market right now. Interest rates are up a little bit, so people are a little tighter with their money. So I'm seeing more of that. What I'm going to tell you is if your clients need it, absolutely ask for it. If they don't need it, you may want to consider whether we even want to mess with it, because the cleaner the contract, the more likely you are to get it accepted. Even if this number is lower because you're not asking for it. But again, something to think about is if I'm asking for $2,500, I might consider making my offer 102.5 instead of 100. So essentially I'm hedging the bet for the seller. I just don't have the ready available cash to do it. Earnest money. You do not have to have earnest money in order for your contract to be valid. Earnest money it sends chills up my spine because I know the side of it when there's a dispute, what happens to earnest money. Everybody wants it back and nobody wants to let it go. So normally what I tell my clients, and I'm not saying you got to be like Don, but this is the way I explain to my clients, is we're not going to offer it unless they ask for it, because I don't like giving away your money just for the sake of giving away your money. If they tell me that they want it, we're absolutely going to give them some to show that we're serious. Flip side of that coin is, I know that they've shown the property 3 times today already. I'm pretty sure they're going to have at least 1, if not 2 offers. So we're going to include some earnest money to make sure our offer looks valid. So to me, it's more of a tool than it is a necessity. But again, I don't like giving away my clients' money and having it sit in a title company for 45 days when it could be sitting in their bank account for 45 days. But I'd never argue about it if the seller wants it, unless it's some exorbitant amount. I never argue with it because there's always a methodology that we can get it back if something goes south. It's going to be delivered to the escrow agent no later than 5 days after the effective date. If earnest money is not timely delivered to escrow agent, then seller may terminate this contract by providing notice thereof to buyer at any time prior to the earnest money being delivered to the escrow agent. It hasn't happened, but my black hat still doesn't like this sentence in here. Your broker believes that a reasonable time frame is within 5 days. This says at any time prior to delivery of earnest money. So let's say we got our contract agreed to tonight. Day 1 for me is tomorrow. So I got 5 days. So I've got Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, technically. So, I mean, technically I've got to have it in by Friday because my 5 days is going to be up. The way I read this, the seller could get another offer first thing in the morning and terminate my contract because my earnest money is not at the title company yet. It hasn't happened, but I could argue it with that verbiage. So the moral of that story is, if you're doing earnest money, make sure your client gets it to the title company as soon as possible. Because I haven't had, again, that's my sneaky black hat thing. I can see the loopholes in a lot of this stuff, and I can see that being an issue if you had a client that chose to do that. Yep. Yeah, we do not have an escrow account. So okay. If additional money is needed, there's a form for that. Make sure you get a receipt at the title company. Closing, where are we going to close with the specific agent? So this would be, Titan Title at Battlefield and you must have a specific day and, specific close time. Without this, your contract's not valid. Because without an end time, I don't have a time that someone has defaulted. So you can't put to be determined in there. If you've got one that we're not sure how long it's going to be, put it out 60 days instead of 45. We can always extend it, but I have to have a deadline date. So I get that question quite a bit when my buyer needs to sell their house in order to buy another house. So I'm going to write an offer contingent upon the sale and closing of their property, but I don't know how long to write this contract for. Well, the conversation I'm going to have with my buyer is, if you truly want to do it this way, our goal is to get your house under contract in 14 days from the day that we get this contract accepted. So typically I would have us a close date 45 days out. So I'm going to add another 15 to that. So we're going to put 60 days on this. Because if you're serious about doing this, we need to have your house under contract in no more than 2 weeks. We can't drag this other seller out. And usually you can get, if you put it in those kinds of terms, you can have harder conversations in 4 days in when you have 90 showings. We've got to get this price lowered down because we got to get people through the door. Versus just having it willy-nilly float out in the wind for till we get a contract on the property. It's whatever. If I'm doing a contingency offer, I want it done. If we've got any kind of possession prior or possession after, you can attach the riders. Unless otherwise, seller warranty, the property will be vacant as of the time of closing, except for tenants if we have them, and they'll except for ordinary wear and tear, and free of any debris or personal property not included above. They haven't changed that verbiage. That's really funny. I hadn't noticed that because the inclusions and exclusions are now not included below. This should be the reasonable expectation of your client. When they walk in, the house should be what I call broom clean condition. Carpets don't have to be deep clean. You know, the counters don't have to sparkle, but there shouldn't be a giant pile of trash in the corner. There shouldn't be, you know, stuff in the backyard. That closet should be completely empty. Those kinds of things. So we'll get to the walkthrough here in a minute, but I think walkthroughs are incredibly important. If your client doesn't want to go, try to go anyway. I very rarely will either not have the client meet me or not put my own eyes on it before we close, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page about, well, yesterday there were doorknobs in the house, today there's not. I had all the toilets and doorknobs stolen one night. Another one I had, they came and took all the gutters off. When they were moving out, they just took the gutters off and took them with them. So make sure you're putting your eyes on the property, because once they sign off on it, and once those funds are transferred, your buyer's up the creek. And then they're going to start calling you. Then you're going to call me. Then they're going to call me. And that's just a lot of calls. I'm on the phone enough. All right, inclusions and exclusions. These are the things that your client should reasonably expect to be in the property. A couple of things to take note of. Propane tanks, you need to make sure whether or not they're owned by the property. Because there could be, you know, that tank could be out there. It could be great. Your client could take it over, but they're going to have to talk to ABC Gas Company to transfer the account because the client doesn't actually own the tank. So you need to make sure that those things, because if they don't own the tank, then it's going to be under exclusions, and it should be in the MLS, propane tank, owned or leased. Other things to pay attention to, becoming more and more prevalent, solar panels. What's the status with the payment on the system? Is your client intending to pay off that note at closing, or was your client intending my client to take that over as a payment? Because if my client's taking that over as a payment, what's that payment? Does my client qualify with the solar company, as well as is that going to screw up their loan? Because a lot of sellers, I think agents are becoming smarter and educating their clients better now. But there was a period where a lot of sellers didn't realize that that note was due paid in full the date of their closing, because they could transfer the account. Solar companies have done some things now where some of those things can be transferred. To a lesser extent, water softeners, most people own those, but there are also still some of those Culligan deals out there that if you allow us to come service it once a month, we'll let you have all of our equipment for free. Make sure it's actually owned. Alarm systems, Nest doorbells, thermostats. If they've got one of those on there and your client wants it, I'm going to tell you to put it as included, because I can't count the number of times, honestly, that the fancy doorbell's not there and now there's just a regular one. Or now the old square thermostat is on there and the fancy one's gone. Because we didn't say that we wanted to keep it. There's still a thermostat in the property. Technically, in my opinion, it's different than the day we looked at it. But then we just get into an arguing match, and normally the other agent throws $50 at it and it goes away. So the easier way to do that is we want those things to stay. Speaker systems, TV mounts. It seems pretty obvious, but if you guys want those things to stay, make a note of it. Exclusions. If you want that above ground pool gone in the backyard, make it an exclusion. My favorite one we had to do one time was somebody had built I'm going to tell you, gang, it was at least as long as two of those tables and maybe longer and twice as wide. This wooden train that was in this person's front yard. Yeah, we kind of want that gone. Contingency. Is this contingent upon the seller selling a property, or is it not? If it is, then we're clearly going to attach either contingency for sale or contingency for closing. And I should have time to show you guys both of those. Appraisal contingency. If your client is doing any type of financing, please, please, please check this box, because it's the only thing that allows your client to get out of the contract from the lender based on financing. If this box, or excuse me, based on appraisal, if this box is not checked and the property doesn't appraise, your lender can't send me a denial letter based on appraisal. All right. If buyer desire, so if there's an issue, we've got this many days to get our appraisal. 25 by default. I'm going to tell you to carry this through to your close date. You will have some people argue with you and push back, and if they do, that's fine. But the reason I say that, so let's say I've got a 45-day closing. Appraiser comes out the first time, says the property's not going to appraise until the roof's going to be replaced. Okay, great. The roof's being replaced next week. Okay, great. I'll come back out and reappraise it next week. Roof gets replaced, comes back out and appraises the property. Roof gets replaced on the 25th day. He comes out on the 26th day. Sorry, it's still not going to make it. Then I'm up the creek because my appraisal contingency has expired. So I just carried that through to closing for any of those kinds of hiccups that come up. If there is an issue, then we can send appraisal notice to the seller side. And then we've got 5 days to get on the same page about what's going to happen with that. I think that's plenty, gang, because if we can't get on the same page in 5 days, we're probably not going to get it done. And if it goes to the 6th or 7th day and you still get the deal done, that's fine. I wouldn't mess with this time frame. I don't think there's a need for it. In my opinion, yes. So if you made this, if we were up here and this was 60 days on this, then I would make that a 60-day time period as well. All right. Financing contingency. Is it not contingent upon financing, non-conventional or conventional? Did I miss the? No, they moved it. Okay. There it is. This is the one that always hides over here on me. Not contingent on financing does not mean that the buyer can't get financing. It means that you can't send me a denial letter stating that they can't get financing. It's saying that they can pay for it with cash out of the mattress, out of the backyard. They can get a loan on it. They can get it from grandma. But either way, some way they're showing up at closing with money. If you have a pre-approval letter or proof of funds, check the box. Non-conventional, that's your government loans, FHA, VA, USDA. I'll show you that rider too. All the verbiage in that rider is very similar to all of this right here. It says, I'm going to do everything I can for conventional. I'm going to do everything I can, not limited to getting loan, credit report, all the financing below. If I do not deliver a notice of timely described by 5 p.m. on the date of blank, I'm going to tell you to carry that through to closing too. Because same thing here. I'm 2 days out from closing, so I'm 32 days in. And all of a sudden, the underwriter wants some new thing because my client's on a new job last year, gets it, and then denies it because of whatever that underwriting thing is. If I'm out of this loan contingency, my client is still expected to show up with funds at closing. So I always carry this through to my close date too, just to make sure if one of those things comes up at the last minute, we're covered. Good. And if we have completed with the terms of paragraph C3, that we have an inability because of the letter we received from the lender, then this contract shall terminate with earnest money being returned to the buyer. I don't like this section because I don't think it's anybody's turn or anybody's business what my client's terms are, but it's here, so we have to have something in it. Are they getting a percentage of the purchase price, or are they getting this amount of a loan with an interest rate not to exceed this amount for a period of this number of years, fixed, adjustable, or other? And in other terms, I always put all terms to be determined by lender. That way, if anything comes up, any changes, if the interest rate is 6 1/4 and we said 6, it's okay. The lender is determining the terms. We're going with whatever the lender said. No, you're going to put things in every one of these blanks, but I still just hedge my bets and put that in the last blank. So if something changes, I'm still covered. If I don't attach one of these about my inability for the loan failure, closing of another property. Hang on, I'm going to make sure I'm telling you guys right here. Oh, so if we haven't attached contingency for sale or contingency for close, then we can't say that we can't buy the property because our property didn't close. So we've got to have one of those two attached. And then also, it says right here, I told you this earlier, if there is no appraisal contingency, item B is not checked above, or it has been waived or removed, then failure of the property to appraise the purpose price will not constitute the grounds to exercise this finance contingency. And then here in italics, if loan contingency deadline passes without termination, buyer remains obligated under this contract and must have available funds required to close. All right, title and survey. It says you've got 10 days if it's blank to get it in. I think that's ample. I don't think you really need to change that. As long as you get paperwork to title company, you should have it back in no time. All right. Typically, what I would tell you the way it operates is seller does a title search and buyer pays for title insurance. That's what I would call a typical transaction. In this contract, we got 4 different ways we can do it. A says that the seller's going to pay for both the title search as well as the title insurance. So I've got a first-time home buyer that's just broke as a joke with no money, but they do have enough down payment to get into the house, but they're not going to have any free cash to do anything else. So I say, okay, Mr. Seller, we're going to offer you, I've already asked 102 because I'm hedging my bets on the closing costs. We're going to offer you 103, but we're going to ask for you to pay for both the title search and the title insurance. Don't think I've ever seen A used. B says we're going to split it 50-50, which sounds great on paper, but title search is never going to be the same price as title insurance. Somebody's going to come out ahead and somebody's going to come out behind. C is exactly the way I described it. Seller does the search, buyer pays for the insurance. And then D says the buyer's going to pay for both. So my example on that would be, we're going to offer you $90,000 cash, close in 10 days, and the buyer will also do the title search as well as pay for their own insurance. I've seen D used a couple of times in that manner. I don't think I've ever seen A or B honestly used. So 99 times out of 100, you're just going to check box C and move on. Okay. Title company will be issued by X. And then whenever we get that, I have 10 days to review the title commitment after its receipt, including all recorded subdivision and other use of restriction rights and easements, and all other recorded documents referenced therein, which buyer may desire to obtain and deliver their objections, et cetera, et cetera. 10 days is plenty if all you're doing is reviewing a title commitment. But this says also any other recorded documents, which could and does include a survey. So if you are getting a survey on the property, I'm going to tell you to carry this time frame through to your closing, because you're never going to get a survey done, ordered, done, and report back in 10 days. I just promise you that won't happen unless you've got a friend. So otherwise, I don't see any reason to change that, because once you get it, I don't know if you've all read an entitlement or settlement statement yet. I think you have. You ought to be able to read one in 10 minutes, much less 10 days. So if you have any objections, then I'll get to objections here in a second. This one down here only applies if you've checked box D right here. Because essentially what this says is the buyer has the right to get the search. The buyer has the right to look at that search. The buyer has the right to tell the buyer whether the buyer's happy with the buyer search that the buyer got. And they've got 20 days to do that. And then if they've got a problem, then they can tell the seller about it. But if there are any objections, then we can deliver the survey or title commitment seller pertaining to such objections. Then we have 7 days to essentially everybody get on the same page. Same thing here. I don't see really any reason to change this, because if we can't get on the same page in 7 days, probably not going to happen. So let's assume that it doesn't. We don't get on the same page because there was a $500 lien from the city on the property, and the seller said, by God, I told the city not to mow that grass. I am never paying that bill. That thing can sit there and rot for all I care. So we haven't come to an agreement. Deal dies. Everybody goes back to their starting point. Earnest money goes back to buyer. Seller goes back on the market. Line 136. Unless buyer within blank 3 additional days after buyer's receipt of seller's response to buyer's objections agrees in writing to accept title without correction of such objections. You have 3 days to, what their fancy word they use, capitulate. So essentially the deal can die and the buyer can come back and say, we'll pay that $500 because we want the property. We'll go ahead and take that off of the title and we'll pay for it ourselves. Make sense? Your buyer's probably mad enough at that point that they're not going to want to do that. But they have the option to say, okay, since they're being jerks and they're not going to do it, we'll step up, we'll take over, and we can do it. Because it doesn't have, you don't have to take that full 7 days. Because I could send my objection to the seller today, and you could call me back and say, my seller said he's never going to correct that. So essentially, as of today, my deal died, not 7 days from now. And then my client still has those 3 days that they can come back and say, oh crap, we'll pay for it so we can get the house. Seller's responsible for clearing anything off that comes up between now and the title date, or now and the close date. I think there's anything, the rest of that's pretty legalese. All right, inspections. This is the one you'll probably call me about the most. Property being sold in its present conditions, no warranty expressed or implied. Conditions of the property clearly visible should be considered by buyer in setting the purchase price or by making correction of such conditions by seller a requirement of this contract. If you can see it with your own eyes while you're showing the property and the buyer wants it fixed, put it in your offer. It's as simple as that. If the seal's broken in the front window, put it in your offer. Front seal, front window to be sealed to be replaced. Because if we're going to get to here in just a minute, that if it's not in an inspection or a specialist report, you can't ask for it. So if for some reason the inspector doesn't put that window in their report, you can't get it fixed now. Now, I don't expect you to go turn on every light bulb, open every door, run every faucet. I mean, if you do, that's great, but we hire inspectors for a reason. But if there's something glaringly obvious, put it in your offer. Cost of availability of insurance should also be ascertained during the inspection period, including but not limited to flood. If there's any damage caused by the buyer or any of the buyer's agents, buyer agrees to immediately repair the damage to the property and to hold the sellers harmless from any claims and expenses that come out of that. And if there is any of those expenses, they shall survive the termination of this contract. So just leaving the contract does not absolve the buyer from fixing anything that the buyer may have screwed up while that they were doing their thing. Okay. Love letters, transaction brokerage, and property data. Property data should be, in my opinion, called the get out of jail free paragraph. Because it says within blank days, 5 if there's none stated after the effective date, buyer may review additional data regarding the property. Here's the magic 5 words, including but not limited to zoning, taxes, school, square footage, land improvements, subdivision documents, sex offenders, convicted criminals. If there's any subdivision documents, when I don't understand still how we're supposed to find them if they're unrecorded, but if there's any subdivision things that aren't part of the covenants that we can see, we have the right to review those. The magic words, including but not limited to. So the off the reservation example I give on this one is, let's say I had a client in California and they are moving here, and I take them on a FaceTime walking tour of this house. They love this house. We make an offer today. I leave property data for the 5 days. I go pick them up at the airport on Friday. We drive up to the house. They say, nope, not buying this house. What are you talking about? We haven't gotten out of the car yet. There's a fire hydrant in the front yard. I had a fire hydrant at my house 2 houses ago. There was a fire next door. They dropped the crane on my roof. They broke my car. I will never live in a house with a fire hydrant in the front yard, including but not limited to any reason they can get out. So what I will tell you as someone, if I were receiving offers and I had 2 identical offers and one of them had property data at 0 days and one had property data at 5 days, I would tell you almost 99% of the time I'm going with the one that has 0 days, because it's one less way that buyer can just unilaterally leave the contract. Now, flip side of that coin, if you have a buyer and they're concerned about any of those things and you need to use that time, ask for it. But the smaller that number, in my opinion, the better it is. And the other thing is, if we're concerned if there's sex offenders living in the neighborhood, hey, Mr. Buyer, why don't you go get on your computer right now and look? It'll take you 5 minutes and you can figure it out. It's not your job to do all of those searches for them. Keep that in mind. It's your job to encourage them if that's a concern of theirs, and we can help guide you to those places. But I'm not about to tell you, oh, don't worry about it. There's not one even close. Because close to me and close to you could be something completely different. Inspection reports. Buyers may option expense, obtain written inspection reports, condition of the property reasonably deemed to be necessary by the buyer or its lender. Here's those magic words again, folks. Including but not limited to condition and presence of floodplain, environmental, mold, termite, wood, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go through all that. Your buyer has the right to inspect anything on that property they want. 5 magic words, including but not limited to. So we're going to go get the property inspected. And then the buyer must furnish a copy of the relevant portions of the written inspection report to seller, along with the written list of any unacceptable conditions noted herein on the inspection notice within blank days. I think pretty much across the board in Springfield, everyone's made that 15. Give yourself 2 weeks to get your inspector in and report back. If you can get it done faster, great, get it done faster, but make sure you've got time to get it done. After the effective date, but inspection report indicates, so if in our general inspection, it indicated that we should have a further inspection or a specialist, you can give notice to the seller and say, hey, we need an additional 5 days. And I don't think you need to change this. I think 5 is plenty to get a specialist in here. So my general inspector's gone out and said, hey, we've got a lot of granular loss. We got some shingles pilling up, some pop nails. Suggest you have a qualified, roofer check this out. If I'm still within my normal inspection period, I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm just going to call ABC Roofing, have them go out and check it. If I'm up against the end of my inspection notice period, then I'm going to send you an email. Actually, there's an official notice of additional time for specialist report. That is the way I should be encouraging you as your broker to do it the proper way. But any notice is notice, because truly this is just the buyer saying, oh yeah, by the way, we're taking an additional 5 days. Everybody's already agreed to it in the contract. You're just putting the seller on notice that that's what's going to happen. Now, if you send me that notice, I'm going to expect when you send me your inspection notice that there's a specialist report attached to that. This is not just a 5 free days because me and my client couldn't get together. If that's the case, extend your inspection notice period. Don't just utilize the specialist period willy-nilly like that. Also, your client has a right to have a specialist inspect every single item on the property. They don't have to have a general come out at all. If all they're worried about is the roof and the HVAC, you can send out those 2 people and that's it. Or if they're concerned about every system and they want every system looked at by an expert, you can send out a plumber, an HVAC guy, a roofer, a flooring guy, plumber, all of that. You can send out all individuals if you choose to do that. You just have to give the buyer or the seller reasonable notice, and hopefully you've squeezed those all in the same time period so the seller's not constantly leaving the house. But your client has the right to inspect any and everything that they want, however they choose to do so. I love this line right here. All inspection reports, including further specialist evaluations, are the sole responsibility of the buyer and not seller. It's a huge pet peeve of mine. When you get an inspection notice and it says seller to have electrical panel inspected by certified electrician and all items repaired. That's not my seller's job. My seller has the right to call his own electrician out there and refute what your specialist said, but it's not my seller's job to do your buyer's inspection. And it says it right there in black and white. All inspection reports, including further specialist, is the buyer responsibility of the buyer, not the seller. And Mr. Buyer, you may submit only one inspection notice, and you cannot object to anything that is not in your inspection report or specialist notice. And if you don't get this done in whatever this time period is here, you're deemed to accept the property as is. All right, so we've done our inspection. We have looked it over with our client, and we have sent it to the seller. Sorry, we've got 3 choices once we get our inspection back. We can tell the seller, hey, everything's A-okay. We're satisfied with the inspection. We're ready to move forward. We can say 2, there's some things that we really want fixed, so we're going to send you an inspection notice, copies of the relevant inspection report, as well as how we want those things remedied. And then, or number 3, it says, you know what, we're not happy with the inspection. We're just going to terminate the contract. So down to 194, those are your options. Yay, we like it, and we want some stuff fixed, or C, we're out. Unless you come down here and you check this little magic box at 196. If you check the box at 196, you have effectively erased 194, the line number 3. Because what this says is you either have to say that you're satisfied with the inspection or you have to give the seller the opportunity to remedy whatever the issues are. This is another one I kind of go back to apples. If I have two offers that are side by side and they're the same, I'm probably going to take the one that's got the box checked versus the one that doesn't have the box checked. Because again, they can't just unilaterally leave the contract. They have to give my seller an opportunity to make those repairs. Now, if you're working with an an investor, they may not want that check. They may want the ability just to walk away from it if they don't like what the inspection is. Okay. So we've done our inspection. We've gone over it with our client. We prepared it and we have sent it off to the seller. Then all parties have 10 days if left blank to reach a written agreement as to who's going to complete and pay for the correction of unacceptable conditions, or if a monetary adjustment is going to be made in lieu of that, or if we're just going to mutually, if there's another resolution we can come to, or we're just going to terminate. Keep in mind, when you're making your inspection notice request, if you've sent ABC Roofing out there to look at the roof, if they go out there, say, write me a bid while you're there, then you can say roof to be repaired as per attached bid from ABC Roofing. Client doesn't, or the seller doesn't have to use ABC, but I will tell you probably 70% of the time, you'll end up getting your person used because that's one less thing the seller, one less headache they've got to deal with. Send your guy out, have him do it. We don't care. My insurance is going to pay for it anyway. If there's a monetary adjustment being made that the seller's going to give you, we're going to give you $3,000 instead of doing any repairs, then you need to talk to the lender to find out, how do we want to get that? Am I reducing the sales price? Can we get sellers concessions? Can they actually get a check at closing? How can we do that without messing up their loan? What's the best avenue to go for us to get that money? So we have, and please don't do this, but I'm using big numbers for my example. So my buyer has sent an inspection notice request of 20 items. Seller comes back and says, I'm only going to fix 8. Buyer comes back and says, I'll take 18. Seller goes back and says, I'll do 10. So you get where I'm going with this. We're bouncing back and forth, negotiating. At any point during this volley, the seller can throw their hands up in the air and say, okay, we'll fix everything in your initial inspection report. Let's move forward. Also, at any point during this volley, the buyer can throw their hands up in the air and say, okay, we'll take the property as it sits right now. You don't have to fix a thing. So we're volleying back and forth. If we can't get on the same page within this 10 days that we talked about up here, the contract terminates. Everybody goes back to their original corners. Seller can put the property back on the market. Buyer can go look at new things. But then the buyer also here again has a 2-day capitulation period to come back and say, you know what, we want the house so bad, we'll take it as is. They can't ask for anything to be repaired, but they can come back and wave their white flag and say, we'll still take the property. Okay, we good on how inspection process works? Clear as mud? Excellent. I love being able to say this. You can ignore paragraph F entirely. Does not apply to us. All right, home warranty, either the seller's providing one, we want one from the seller, or there's already one in place. Disposition of earnest money as well as loss and condemnation. I'm not going to bore you guys to tears with all this, but this is the legal ease that we have in the event that we have an escrow dispute or we have a fire or a flood or something on the property. If there's an escrow dispute, we can either have a written agreement that how it's going to be disposed of. It can go to court. There can be a court order. It can just go and be held at the state. You can sue them. There's avenues. Again, I'm not going to bore you with all of the avenues because it's ad nauseum boring. Same thing with loss and condemnation. Essentially, short version of this, let's say we had a fire in the kitchen. Buyer has the right to either take the property as it sits and take the earnest check, take the property as it is at a reduced price, take the property waiting for the seller to fix the property, exit the property, exit the contract completely. So, I mean, there's options that come there. Fortunately, I don't see too many that we have the loss and condemnation. Earnest money is usually the one when we have people fighting about it. And then that's why I said I don't like it, because then everybody's butting heads and pulling on that check trying to get it to themselves. Adjustments in closing costs we talked about already. Here's everything that the buyer is going to be responsible for, seller, and then here's what we're going to prorate. A couple things to note in seller concessions. It cannot include, I'll make sure I'm telling you this the right way. There it is. Not to exceed the amount set forth, lender fees, title commitment fees. It's not going to pay for any other expenses paid with the closing as approved by the buyer's lender. There it is. Not to include the cost of a home warranty or title fees paid by seller. So if we're asking for a home warranty, that's over and above our closing costs. And then the stuff that the seller's already paying for here, that does not come out of that amount. 1031 exchange. By signing this document, everyone's agreeing that if the seller chooses a 1031 exchange their money, that's fine. Doesn't affect the buyer. I think it's a couple extra pieces of paper for the seller. And I'm honestly not even sure why it's in there, but everybody's just agreeing that that's okay. Once the document is signed, it can't be altered in any way unless it is signed by all parties. All right, default and remedy. In the event the seller defaults, you have two, and they say three, but I'm going to say two and or a third one. Seller has a right to essentially specifically enforce the contract and require the buyer to purchase it. Buyer has the right, or seller has the right to release the buyer from the contract and retain the buyer's earnest money. And then it says, or pursue any other remedy and damages available by law, which means sue them. I would tell you that should be and or, because just because you sign a mutual release doesn't necessarily mean that the attorney's still not going to come after you. It is a pretty good instrument, but at the same rate, if somebody incurs additional expenses and or they have the right attorney, they might still come after you. So you got a chance to either make them perform, let them loose with get their earnest money, or sue them. If the buyer defaults, excuse me, I did that backwards. That was if the seller defaults. The buyer has the right to keep their earnest money and any other expenses that they have had. So if the buyer has paid for title search and title commitment and all those things, the seller is now responsible for those fees as well. If the buyer defaults, the seller only gets the earnest money because they assume any other fees that the seller has incurred will be recaptured when the property is actually sold. Okay, so essentially the avenues are the same, but the buyer's entitled to a few more things if the seller defaults on them, any expenses that they've had. Prevailing party, if somebody does have to sue, whoever wins is also going to get their attorney fees paid for. Seller disclosure statement, either we got one at A, we want one at B, or we're not getting one at all on C. Best of the accurate to the seller's knowledge. If they find anything out between now and closing, they're supposed to let us know if it's anything comes up. Lead-based paint, if it's prior to 78, there will be one. Walkthrough. You've got a chance for multiple walkthroughs, essentially. One, to make sure the property's still in the same condition that it was when you made the offer. Two, to make sure any repairs were actually completed. So, or completed satisfactorily or to workmanlike manner, or whatever you're looking for there. I would tell you, if you are re-inspecting repairs, I would tell you to do that as far away from closing as possible. That way, if there's an issue, we've got time to fix it. When you call me at 2 o'clock with the 4 o'clock closing and something hadn't been done, then we've got to scramble. Most often we can still get it figured out, but I'd rather get it figured out 3 days before versus 3 hours before. And as far as the final walkthrough, I try to do that as close to closing as possible. Because if I'm closing on a property on Friday and we do a walkthrough today, all the clients' boxes were stacked up against that wall. I don't see that they've gouged a giant hole in it when they were taking the couch out. So if I do it today and then we sign off on paperwork and funds are delivered on Friday, that's my client's problem now. So I try to do that truly on the way to closing is my goal every time. If the client can meet me there, great. If not, like I said, I'm at least going to try to go do a quick run through unless it's, way on the outskirts somewhere. And I have found people to go look at it for me. Okay, I'm kind of concerned that they might have taken X, Y, and Z. Will you run down the road and go check that for me? Signature, same thing as in our employment agreements. You got all parties can be anywhere in the world and sign this. We are going to follow the law. Don't ask me to do anything illegal or unenforceable. And once this contract is signed, it is a legally binding document. So it is enforceable and so forth. If then hearsay doesn't matter. If it's not in the contract, it doesn't exist. Notices, communication, anything like that delivered to seller or buyer shall be in writing and shall be deemed delivered to the seller or buyer's agent Buyer, upon delivery to the broker. Notice to the agent is notice to the client. I should have a reasonable expectation that when I send you an offer, it is much the same as if I sent that offer directly to your client. Now, if you're going to wait till Friday at 5 to review offers, that better be in the MLS and or you better have told me. Because if I find out after the fact, I'm not going to probably be happy about it, especially if I called you to say, hey, I'm going to go show 123 Main Street. Yeah, so you should expect immediate responses. I will tell you, you will be disappointed because it won't happen. But that should be the expectation, and that should be, in my opinion, the way you guys should operate as well. As soon as you've got something, you can send it, get it out the door. Okay. Do we have any riders that we're attaching? Backup compensation agreement. That will be a yes, because we're going to attach that every time. Do we have contingency for closing or contingency for sale? And I'll show you guys those in just a second. If you're doing a government loan rider, I'll show you that one too. If you're doing a warranty, I usually check the box and put a chose a home warranty, and I will fill out the warranty application and just attach it to the contract. That way it's very clear what my client expects. And also, guess what? It expedites getting the warranty in place. Also, a great tip on putting a warranty on your seller's property: free seller coverage. If something breaks in your house while we have it listed, guess what? You're covered. Any special agreements, carpet allowance. Don't put compensation things in here, please. Save that for the compensation rider. If you've got something specific that doesn't seem like it fits somewhere, call me and we'll work through it. But, if there's inclusions and exclusions you couldn't fit on those blanks on page 2, you can also use that stuff here. But on the flip side, if you are working for a seller, make sure you're paying attention to the special agreements blanks and the inclusions and exclusions blanks. They're very easy to skip over because when you put something in there in DocuSign, little teeny tiny letters. So if you're not paying attention, sometimes you will miss it. And then, because we've had a couple of those situations where, hey, where's the refrigerator? Well, we didn't agree to that. Yeah, we did go look at your contract, and sure enough, it's there on inclusions. Well, the seller's already moved to Oregon, so now the agent's buying a new refrigerator. Watch those things, gang. Personal interest of disclosure, same thing as in our employment agreement. Sources of broker compensation. If you are receiving all your compensation from the listing broker, then clearly it would just be the seller side. If you have received a retainer fee, or if you're receiving a transaction fee, or if you're not receiving all of the fee from the seller, then it would be seller and buyer. If the seller's not offering anything, then clearly you're getting all your money from the buyer. Did that make sense on the transaction fee though? You are still technically receiving compensation from that buyer, whether it be in the form of a retainer or a transaction fee. So if that's the case, you need to make sure you check that. Buyer is requesting seller pay compensation from the proceeds of the sale to or listing broker shares compensation with broker assisting in closing. And we're going to attach this, can be used for this purpose. So yes, check that. Why do we have that in 2 places? Interesting. I don't think I realized that was in both places. And we're going to broker and we're going to warrant that. Brokerage relationship, you will be a limited agent, whether it be buyer or seller, and you will also be a designated agent. Clearly, if you work on both sides, then you'll be a dual agent. Broker's firm, broker's license number, your signature, your printed name, your license number, and the date. Then it comes over here. And they're just telling us that we are the brokers. You can't hold us harmful for anything that we have done. We're giving you the best to our ability. We do not rely on us for title, lender, any of those kinds of things. If we're part of a franchise, you can only sue us. And this is the part that's really most important to us. Under Missouri law, brokers are immune from liability statements made by engineers, land surveyors, unless the statement was made by a person employed by the broker, the statement making the statement was selected and engaged by the broker, or the broker knew prior to closing that the statement was false or recklessly disregarded the statement. So if someone that works for me tells the client, oh, don't worry about that roof, it'll be fine, and the client takes that at face value, then I can be liable if something goes wrong with the roof. If I told my client, you must use ABC roofing, and my client uses ABC roofing and there's an issue and they choose to sue them, then I can still be liable for that too. If I sold a house 10 years ago and I know in the basement, there's a giant 4 foot or 4 inch crack in the foundation. And now when I'm selling the house to my new buyer, they have finished the basement and there's a beautiful oak bookcase that runs all the way down that wall. Seller didn't disclose it. Buyer didn't see it. Appraiser didn't see it. Inspector didn't see it. I kept it to myself. We have another, I don't know, it's been what, 2 years? So we have another 100-year flood again. The basement fills with water. They take down the bookcase. They see that that's open. They do their research. They realize that I had knowledge of that prior and didn't disclose it. Now I'm in trouble. So somebody you hired said it. Somebody you told them they had to use said it. Something that you kept to yourself and didn't say it, or knew that something that they had been told was incorrect and didn't correct it, then you're liable. Otherwise, you should be free and clear. Sales information, we're going to publish all this information to our board. Same thing with the Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act. They're going to have to be citizen or resident alien in order to do anything. Please don't sell properties to terrorists. Deadline and effective date. You do not actually have to have a deadline or expiration on your contract for it to be valid. This one to me is much like earnest money. If I feel like there's a sense of urgency, I certainly use it. Normally, if I would just show a property today, I would probably give you, unless there was a real sense of urgency, probably till 5 o'clock on Thursday. I usually try to get a full 24 hours if that's reasonable for my client. Now, if it's going to be much less than that, I'm certainly going to call you and tell you why. Hey, I know I got an expiration 6 o'clock on this today, but my client's in town for today only. We really want your house. If you can get that done by 6 o'clock for us, great. If not, we're going to look at another one at 6:15. I'm just going to let you know why I've got such a short time frame on there, because I will promise you, if you put too short of time frames on there and don't let people know why, you may not get the deal just because they're like, well, this is unreasonable. I'm not even going to entertain this. I couldn't present it to my client till 7, so I guess you're out of luck. I don't know that I would say that there is a standard. I usually at least try to give you till 5 o'clock the next day. And a lot of times I just consider, okay, what activities do I have in the evenings in the middle of the week? You know, do I remember them having pictures of kids on the wall? They might have soccer or whatever. He may not be able to get with the client immediately. I don't like to let it go through the weekend if I can keep from it. I'd rather know by Friday at 5 versus Sunday at 5, because we all know the activities go up over the weekend. I may end up with competition. So just use that again, I won't say even sparingly. It's just that is truly a case-by-case scenario about what your deadline either needs to be or whether you even need one. Time is of the essence in the performance of parties' obligations under this contract. All references to specific time shall mean central time, and herein a day defined as a 24-hour calendar day, 7 days per week, including weekends, holidays, festivals, and everything. I go under contract today on the 8th of October. Day 1 of all of my time frames is October 9th. It is not today. Today is day 0 until 12:01 tomorrow morning. That begins day 1. Okay? But again, weekends, holidays, and that's something to always consider, especially coming up on Thanksgiving and Christmas. If you're scheduling inspection time periods or closing schedules or whatever, keep in mind, well, there's probably going to be a 4-day window in there, at least probably on both of those, where you're not going to get anything done. So if that means you need to extend that to 20 days instead of 15, keep that under consideration. Buyers will sign off here. If seller signs right here, then they have accepted the offer. If they reject, they'll put initials, or if they're going to send a counter offer, we'll do that here. Quick and dirty version. Good? All right. So let's say that the seller didn't like what we sent them. So they're going to send us back counter offer. You'll just put whichever one it is. In this case, it's coming from the seller. And the first one, it would be counter offer number 1 from the seller, property address, seller's name, buyer's name. And you can change just specific things. So let's say they were happy with all of our terms, except they want the purchase price to be 105. That's all they would have to change, and they come back here and sign off on it. If they had 5 days in the property inspection period, you can come back and say, section 7 line, I can't remember what it is, shall be changed, property data days to be 0. Those kinds of things. So whoever makes the offer signs here. If it's accepted by whoever receives it here, if not, we can either reject it or we can counter it. And obviously the next one will be counter offer number 2. Then we just bounce back and forth. Until I've got signatures on both sides, I do not have a contract. All right.
Right now, who's do a reverse contingency.
Special agreements.
Then I have a client that is getting ready to go under contract and they want to stay in that house 30 days, 20 days after closing to help them get patched up and get settled. Where we put that in the contract?
Well, they're called something else. Well, they were both possession after closing. Maybe they're not. Just go back here. I'll look in the contract because it actually states in the contract. Why is it showing up? This is the form right here, 2085R. R. There it is. Starts with agreement. That's why I couldn't find it. So that's what you would use right here. Here's a street address. Seller shall have the right to occupy the property until blank, in terms of whatever. If we're paying for anything, it goes in there. If they fail to vacate, the buyer shall have the right to enter the property. It's pretty self-explanatory. That's the one that you would need to use. So take a look at that, and if you got questions about it, holler at me about it. You would do this as when you presented the contract. You would actually do that, and if you'll notice back here, where'd my contract go? Oh, I'm way down here at the bottom. That's why I can't find it. You would put it right here. Just click another and put seller possession after closing. And it just becomes essentially part of your offer. Have you already made the offer? Does that make sense? Okay. Excellent. I love it when a plan comes together. All right. What are we doing? Did the inspection notice. Inspection notice response is. No, I actually didn't do an inspection notice. Hang on. This is pretty obvious and self-explanatory too, gang. Property address goes here to the seller from the buyer. Either I'm satisfied with everything, I'm not satisfied, and here's what I want fixed. And I'll tell you this, I meant to tell you this earlier too. So let's suppose we do have a laundry list of items and they're clearly not all going to fit in here. At any point in any blank on any contract, you can put see attached exhibit, and it's not always clearly going to be A, but boy, yeah, I can't get my fingers to work. And then you just make a Word document and write exhibit A across the top of it and have everybody sign off on that one too. And it becomes part of the contract. Okay. So if you can't fit everything in here, don't. And truly when you're writing inspection, I haven't done an inspection class in a while. I might see if we can do that next month. I usually say item 7 seller to repair item 7.3.1. I cite exactly whatever it says on the inspection. That way it's abundantly clear what my expectations are for my client. As per, report, seller to have I'm not going to go into it, but anyway, I try to make it very specific so it's abundantly clear what my client's expectations are. Or it says, hey, I'm out of the contract because I don't like the inspection. Keep in mind, if we check that box at 196, I think it is at 192, we can't do that. It goes away. It's only if we left that box unchecked. Okay. And then the seller's got a response to say, hey, we're going to fix everything up above. Hey, nope, we're not going to fix that or anything else. So the contract terminates. And then unless the buyer waves their little white flag and says, we'll take it as is. Or it says, hey, we're not going to fix everything, but we'll make you a counter proposal. And then that goes on the cleverly titled inspection notice response. And then it's much like the other one. It just bounces back and forth until we finally get to an agreement from the seller. We'll fix this. They sign it. Buyer says either we accept this, we do not accept and give you a new one. We do not accept and do not make a counter proposal. So then if that happens, then please capitulate in Part C or return and attach mutual release. So if I was terminating the contract because I didn't like the inspection notice or I didn't like your response, what you were going to fix. So I asked for 20 things. You came back with 8. I say, no, I'm not happy. So I'm going to send you a mutual release. So you can either take that or you can say, wave your flag and say, we'll fix everything in your initial request. Or if it was from the seller, sorry, if it was from the buyer. Anyway, either party can say, nope, I'm done negotiating with you. So you can either say, you can capitulate below and say that you'll take it either as is or you'll fix everything, or sign the attached mutual release. All right, about got you out here. I'm going to show you these last two real quick here. All right, contingency for sale of existing property means my client does not have a contract on their house. My buyer may not even be listed yet. And this is saying, okay, I'm attaching it to the deal that I made on 123 Main Street. So this is the property address I'm doing. My buyer's performance under this contract is contingent upon the sale of their property located at blank. On or before, and we talked about this earlier too. My goal is going to be 60 days, 45 for both closings. I'm going to try to get this property under contract in 2 weeks. Then hopefully we can close them both simultaneously. All right. I'm going to provide notice to the seller if and when the property goes under contract with the existing property notice that I will show you guys in a moment as well. If the sale of the prior existing property does not close on or before this property date right here through no fault of the buyer, then this contract shall automatically terminate. If the contract is terminated pursuant to this rider, then earnest money is returned to the buyer. So unless my buyer has submitted this existing property sale notice, letting the seller know that they are under contract on their property, the seller has the right to terminate this contract by giving me it's 72 by default. I think that's fine. Giving me notice saying we're kicking you out of this contract. It does not necessitate that they have another offer on their property. They can just kick you out because they don't like you, but they've got to give you the option based on this to get out of it. And it's going to become effective automatically unless specified time. And this is not a day 0 situation. This is a true 72 hours. So if I get notice right now, I've got my notices at noon, my clock is already ticking. It doesn't start at 11:59 like everything else does. This is very important right here. If buyer waives this contingency as set forth above, buyer will be obligated to close on this contract on the scheduled closing date, even if buyer's existing property fails to close. In addition, buyer may not terminate this contract on the basis of a loan commitment, which requires the sale or closing of an existing property. So if we waive this contingency, we're essentially waiving the right for the lender to send me a letter and say, oh, you didn't sell your property, we can't give you a loan. And the time frames in paragraphs 5, 6, and 7 will begin once the buyer gives us notice of existing property or delivers that they're waiving this condition. So your buyer's not obligated to do inspections and any of that stuff until their property actually goes under contract. Okay. So we've got this in place, and we get an offer on the buyer's property. So we come in here and we, as the buyers, we fill this out, Mr. Seller, from the buyer, we have a contract that's dated to close on X. Just letting you know, bang, bang, bang. And then our paragraphs 5, 6, and 7 begin, and we're rolling down the road as we normally would. If we didn't get a contract and the seller decides to kick us out, then they're going to say, Mr. Buyer, this is the seller. We're kicking you out as per the terms of the conditions that we had in the contingency for sale. Your time frame has begun. And you have the option now, if you choose to say, Mr. Seller, this is the buyer. We waive the contingency for the sale and existing property. We remain obligated to close into this contract. We may not terminate this contract based on a loan commitment which requires the sale. So we're signing off and admitting the fact we understand I can no longer send you a lender denial letter. Hopefully you are actually submitting this one up here saying, hey, we got under contract. Now, I think this is the last one, gang. I'm losing you. I can tell. Everybody's getting hungry. Client does have a contract on their property or gets a contract on their property. This is the instrument that you want to use because it's what protects you if something goes south with the deal that they have in place. So buyers, through no fault of the buyer, if that deal goes south, then you still have an option to get out of the deal that they're buying over here. This is the property address of the ones that my buyer are purchasing. Buyer's performance on this contract is contingent upon the closing of existing contract dated whatever date I got this property under contract for the sale of their property located at whatever their address is on or before this date. And this contract either does or does not contain another contingency for sale on the other end. If the closing for such sale is not or will not be timely completed through no fault of the buyer, then this contract shall terminate at buyer's option by delivering notice to seller on or before existing property closing date. So there's an actual form for that too. If this contract is pursuant to this rider, earnest money is returned to the buyer. I will also tell you if you are under a contingency for sale and you send me notice that your client has gone under contract, I still want you to send me this document as well. Because you're removing that one, putting me on notice, and this another one that let's put another one back in its place. So if something goes south with their deal, you're not hanging out in the wind. Okay. All right, I'm gonna do a quick glance here and make sure I'm not anything else. I told you the verbiage on this is very similar. Government loan rider, what's either the percentage or the purchase price, number of years, purchase price, or not to exceed whatever your interest rate is. Carry this date through to closing as well. Okay, also here, by accepting this contract, seller makes no promise that he or she will be responsible to pay for any predication work that is required. If buyer does not elect to terminate this contract as set forth above, but predication work is required, then unless agreement is reached between the parties as to whom will compete and pay for such work within 35 days and unstated of the effective date, then this contract shall terminate. I'll be honest with you, gang. When this document came out, I actually had to go look up what predication work meant. That's anything. So we get the FHA appraiser comes out and says the windows have to be scraped and repainted, and you have to put splash blocks in your downspouts and something else. That is the work required by the lender. That is the predication work. It has to happen in order for the loan to go through. But this states in big letters right here, seller makes no promise that they'll be responsible to pay for any. So if you are doing an FHA or a VA loan, I would encourage you in special agreements on the contract to put seller to pay up to $500 or $1,000 of lender required repairs. That will be on top of seller concessions, on top of home warranty. It's a completely separate animal. But that way we're putting them on notice that, yeah, we're still going to ask for inspection items. And if you get it fixed during on inspection, great. But if there's things required by the lender that we don't care about, we still want you to pay and fix those things. And then you can put whatever type of loan we're getting down here. And then in this blank, I do the same thing here. I write all terms to be determined by lender. And then if it's the FHA or VA mandatory clause, this is whatever your purchase price is. Because essentially it's saying the property is not going to appraise for less than this amount. And clearly we don't want it appraising for less than the amount that we're paying for the house. All right, I'm going to turn you loose for the day. What I'm going to tell you guys too, though, is if you have a contract that you're getting ready to send that you're nervous about it, send it to me and I'll look at it first. If you want to go sell a house to your dog tonight and do all the paperwork, go do it, send it to me and I'll grade it for you. If you're sitting in front of a client and your brain goes, actually, I don't think I've got all of you in here. Your brain goes blank. Call me. If I don't answer and you really want to know the answer, call me right back. If I'm available and my phone rings twice from the same person, I do my best to try to get it because then I know you potentially could be sitting in front of a client. If you have not done so already, just text me your name. I don't need anything else because I'll know that's what it is today. And I'll put you on my phone because if you're not in my phone, I will not answer your call. You'll have to leave a voicemail. Let's see how many I've had while we've been sitting here. I had 8 while we've been sitting here and I would have not answered 3 of them. One of them left me a voicemail. Okay. So if you guys got questions, do not hesitate to call me. I mean, sure, call Shanna first and make her work for it, but call me if you got questions. I'm happy to help. Everybody have a great day and go sell something. You bet. Yes. Well, if I would have hit record, you could have found it today. I will make sure.